Welcome to the SAIA AfriSam webinar. We want to share with you some ideas on sustainable design and on some thoughts we have given the new situation that we're facing as architects, as designers, as people involved in the built environment. I think that such a discussion is actually, it's time for it to happen. Notwithstanding the fact that we have got COVID, but you know that SAIA and AfriSam have got a WAS program that has had to be postponed and you know, held back a bit so that we could perhaps hopefully recover from the COVID-19 situation. But I think we all know that COVID is going to be with us for quite a while, and we're going to keep discussing about how we're going to deal with the post-COVID situation. How are we going to work? What are the implications of the COVID-19 situation on design and everything? So where we thought we should share this with you, with everyone, and I'm looking forward to a very good discussion.
I don't know. I can't ask him. Is he going to talk?
Philippa, are you back? Philippa, are you back?
Yes, I'm back.
Okay, great.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. Oh, fill in the gap.
Thanks so much. So thank you, Dr. Mpahlwa, for starting off, and I do apologize. I'm going to have to learn a little bit more about tech. So I'm sure Dr. Mpahlwa introduced himself and that this is the inaugural AfriSam SAIA Sustainability Design Award webinar. My name is Philippa Tumubweinee. I'm the head of school at the School of Architecture, Planning and Geomatics, University of Cape Town. And I'm sure you all know Dr. Mpahlwa. He's an activist, he's an architect. He's also the president of the South African Institute for Architects, SAIA. So part of the reasoning behind this webinar was to start looking at the role that sustainability is going to play in what is some people are calling a new normal. What are the questions around social issues, economic issues, political issues, environmental issues, urban issues that have been unearthed because of what is happening today, that we need to start foregrounding in the way that we as practitioners, as creatives, as designers live and function in order to better our society. I think the one thing that the COVID situation has made really apparent is that we have to find other ways of doing things. How we do things today as practitioners, creatives, designers is not always aligned to the longevity or sustainability of our society. So that's just a little bit of background around how this webinar was conceived and how it started. Obviously under the umbrella of the AfriSam SAIA Sustainable Design Awards. I would just like to maybe as a beginning put out a question to Dr. Mpahlwa and talk about the issue of sustainability. Pre-COVID, during COVID, post-COVID. Dr. Mpahlwa?
Okay, well, thanks. But it's really up to you. I'd like to welcome listeners. Welcome, I see the number of people who've joined the webinar. Gosh, there's a big. I hope it's not coming, everyone, because I'm hearing. Maybe you can turn your speaker or microphone just slightly away.
Okay, I've done that.
Yeah, maybe that's better. So I think first and foremost, as president of SAIA, I think that it's very important that we share platforms like these with the corporate world, with the AfriSams of this world, because I think the world needs to work more together in terms of trying to find solutions. And I believe that this discussion has to test and explore how we can work in interdisciplinary. Now, sustainability for me doesn't start with COVID. I think it is known part of my practice has been about ensuring that architecture plays its role and plays its role in terms of the social dimension of our lives. But we also know that buildings play a very big role in the well-being of people, whether be it at home, be it in the office, whether be it in hospitals, schools. So I think that architects and professionals in general have a big role to play in deciding what spaces do we create, what materials do we use, how do we ensure that we create healthy spaces, and this requires a interdisciplinary approach because we know that technology has advanced to a point where we're able to utilize technology smartly. But at the core of it is the fact that we are trained to think spatially and we're trained to understand the various components of making a building. So from that point of view, for me, COVID or no COVID, architects have a responsibility to ensure that they play their part in creating, improving the welfare of people in the buildings that they occupy. I also think that the fact that we've got now, Green Star rating, the desire for buildings to be rated is a good thing. But I also think that we tend to put too much emphasis on that and forget the basic design principles that we've been taught at university. That is, keep the people at the center of what you do. Buildings must serve people. The orientation of buildings is important because that's when you maximize the impact of the natural environment. The materials you choose shouldn't be toxic. The paint that you use should not have toxic and chemical components. We're moving more towards organic paints now that do not pollute, the spaces. Using natural ventilation as much as possible, ensuring adequate natural light. These are smart design principles that I think we should be employing in any case. And then on top of that, you can add those elements that will then make your building to be in its totality a green building. So, to answer your question, Philippa, we have a responsibility as architects to ensure that, one, we realize that buildings are big contributors to carbon emissions, and how do we reduce that? I have a friend now, whom you know very much. Because he's confined to work in an office during COVID, he realizes it's facing south, and he is freezing cold in there. Because at the time those offices were designed, I suppose not enough care was taken to say, how do we orientate the building such that the office can remain on a temperate climate? So for me, especially living in Africa, I think that, the old knowledge of Rondavels, I keep coming back to this issue. Why they've got thermal walls, why they've got breathing roofs, why they have small windows, is something I learned when I was studying in Germany and got to understand that we are actually overlooking an old science that our people have developed over years. And we're only moving to use technology and the technological advancement and forgetting that we're in a hot climate. We need buildings that have got good thermal performance. We've got a lot of sun. We have to shade our windows from sun or keep them small. And our buildings should breathe. It's just a basic scientific issue that I think we have to reconnect with.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Mpahlwa. Just to extend that argument a little bit, you talk about old knowledges and ways of doing things that actually were responsive to the climate. I'm going to bring that into the contemporary situation. We now have something that is quote unquote unprecedented. We have something that has forced us to engage with our environments quite intimately. How do we translate that knowledge now? This is knowledge that we have partially lost, that we look at as something that is unique, and how do we translate that in our reality today to make this what is now our new normal manageable, to allow for us to actually emerge out of it as a better society?
There are going to be a number of things. I think the unfortunate thing with our country is that we do not have a broad variety of options when it comes to selecting what kind of materials we should use. And the ones that we have, you know, we love convention. We love doing things the way we've been doing them. And I think the combination of things that we need to do is going to be about, have we transformed our building industry to allow various building materials that in the world out there have actually been identified to have those good thermal qualities? Are those produced locally? You know, building with Adobe is fine, you know, if you're doing small scale buildings. If you use rammed earth, which some people are using, just using the soil, is another component. But can you actually use these and build on scale with these kinds of building systems? So there is a reluctance to change our building system because our technology perhaps doesn't allow us at the moment to produce the kinds of materials that you could use to replicate that old technology, because it's about ensuring that buildings have got good thermal performance. What kind of wall materials do you use? Yes, there's a cavity wall and everything, but also how do you deal with moisture in buildings? How do you ensure that buildings ventilate adequately? But what happens in commercial buildings? You have to rely maybe on technology there. But even there, you end up having to import materials, importing triple glazing where you're using glass. And I think our industry has to adapt to the need of society, to the need of architects, to the need of the industry, to make sure that those old technologies that have, you know, granted us the knowledge about buildings can be translated into today's world. So it's again, something where we're going to have to work with the industry, people who produce materials. I heard recently that there's hempcrete, concrete made of hemp, which is lighter than the one that is, you know, full of cement, which we know is a high carbon emitting production to produce cement and all these things. So what materials do we use, do we find today that are environmentally friendly and that allow us to use the knowledge we have to produce healthier and more sustainable buildings?
So I was saying, based on what you have said, what I'm getting from that is that you're suggesting that as people in the built industry specifically, but also as creative people, as designers, as people that educate, we need to move beyond our quote unquote specializations. There's got to be some cross-cutting across different sectors, if I understand you correctly. And one of the things that, for me, I find very interesting about this particular award is the fact that it tries to, and I'm not sure if one could say it is successful, I think it is, it tries to cut across different sectors to say, buildings aren't only about the architects that design them, the engineers that engineer them, the people that supply the materials. They're also about the environment that it lives in. It's about the purpose that it serves. It's about the social impact that it has on it. It's about the economic longevity that those buildings bring up, which I think raises an interesting question. It's almost like we need to break out of our specializations and start working holistically. And I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit and say, as the president of SAIA and as an activist and an architect, how do you envision this coming across different sectors or different, let's call them stakeholders or interest groups? Would you like to maybe have some thoughts around that, give some ideas how we could start to do that?
Sure. I mean, that's something that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, you know. I'll start by saying that my president at SAIA has actually made me realize, one, the important role that architects should be playing in being part of the discourse about built environment issues. But it has also made me aware how irrelevant architects have become in the industry, in the sense that we do not occupy the position and the space which I think we actually deserve. Because, we know that in South Africa, and I mean, this is not to speak negatively of our engineering colleagues, but it is just an established fact that the engineering profession has established itself even to the highest positions of influence in terms of making themselves heard. And as architects, we do not occupy that space. And I think it's something we need to think about, to say, how do we work to regain that space? As architects, we are not seen as strategic thinkers who are able to understand the built environment in its entirety. And we are fighting, at the moment, not a very successful battle to actually claim that space, that we are a central part of trying to find solutions, and we can't just be seen as a luxury. We are not just designers, but we are composers of the built environment in its entirety, and we have to be at the center of the deliberations and the discourse. So the challenge we have is that we maybe it's our own making also, that we have allowed ourselves to be sidelined by not being engaging enough in the discourse, but also just because there are so many other professions that have come up that are actually occupying the position of the architects, either as project managers or as principal agents, because now the principal agent is not only the architect, everyone can be a PA. And it's about also whether our clients actually understand the role that we should be playing as architects, as being at the center of all that. So it's a very complex discussion, Philippa, which I think as architects and professionals, we need to think very deeply. How do we claim that space? And from a SAIA perspective, one of the things that I've sought to do is actually to try and link up with the other players in the industry and open up the channels of communication so that we can also be seen as being part of the entire sector, and not just as people who see ourselves as just responsible for very specific aspects, design and all that. So I think that we've got quite a way to go in order to convince society that we are there to be part of finding solutions from a strategic perspective, not just in terms of drawing plans, as everybody thinks that's all we do.
Thank you for that. I mean, there's some very sobering things in what you have said. I mean, in terms of the perception of architects in the industry, in terms of, let's call them the corridors of influence, the tables that we are not a part of, the conversations that we are not a part of. So as you were speaking, I was thinking, obviously, because I'm in a institution for higher education, how do we from that level already start to inculcate ways of thinking, ways of doing, ways of being, to allow for what I think is a very noble and interesting, constructive profession to gain the prominence that it has? All right. I'll just wait for Luyanda to come back in, but maybe we could start taking some questions from the audience. If you want to write your questions in the chat, and then I will be able to read those out, respond to them, and maybe when Dr. Mpahlwa is back, he can respond to some of those. There's a lot of questions around sound, and I'm glad that we seem to have sorted that out, but I'll like to take some more questions for now. if there are no questions, we wait for Dr. Mpahlwa to come through. I'll maybe reiterate the categories for the design awards. We have category A, which is sustainable architecture. And this refers to a new building or a group of buildings, the conservation of the same, restoration, rehabilitation, refurbishment, existing buildings, historic precinct or areas. Within this category, we're looking at architecture per se, so that has got to do with a built artifact. One thing to note within this category is in previous award cycles, you had to be a member of SAIA to apply for this category. That does not hold anymore, so that's one thing to note. In B, this looks at research and sustainability. It could be anything from a peer-reviewed article, a book, a series of talks, a seminar. So this is just work that has research or thinking that is being propagated or inculcated around ideas of sustainability. Category C is a sustainable product or technology. This is incredibly open and vast. We've had various submissions in this category. It could be anything from an app to a device to a network around people of different people in society, some kind of recycling. This is a very, very broad category in which to submit an entry. And the last one is category D, which is a sustainable social program. This looks specifically at the social impact of programs, networks, or systems that people or groups of people have put in place. So I'm hoping that Dr. Mpahlwa will come in. That was just a revise for the categories. There's a question from Tanya van Sale. Are you a registered professional architect? The short answer to that is yes. Tanya, thank you for the question. There's a question from Eben. What does one do with all the buildings if everyone continues to work from home? That is a very interesting question. I think we're going to have to start rethinking our environments and how these environments work for us. So an interesting statistic, I live in Cape Town, a lot of the buildings on Beitengracht were office blocks, which have been empty now for the last 80 odd days. And a lot of the tenants in there have realized that they actually don't need to be paying what they're paying for those buildings. So what is happening is there's discussions around how do you start repurposing those buildings if they're not offices? Do they become housing? Instead of building more buildings, which could be seen as unsustainable, maybe we need to repurpose some more buildings. All right, if there are no more questions, while we wait for Dr. Mpahlwa to come back online, I was trying to prompt him before he got taken off the webinar around higher education. Obviously, I'm in a higher education institution. I teach first year. I'm very passionate about teaching first year. It's one of the joys in my life. I'm incredibly privileged that every year I interact with young, intelligent, incredibly creative, imaginative people. And one of the things that I was trying to get Dr. Mpahlwa to talk about is that within these architectural schools or schools that deal with the built environment, how do we start at that level already, where people start to become professionals? How do we start to bring about this culture where we understand that we're part of a broader ecosystem, but more than that, that we actually have a voice within that ecosystem in order to move away from the lack of importance or the lack of recognition of what we do?
But Philip, I was still starting to answer the question on what are we going to do with the buildings. I think it's a very important question because, firstly, I'm of the view that we've got to start thinking about how our cities actually are built and how they work. And, you know, I do not think COVID is bringing the death of the office. I think it's just going to make us to rethink how we utilize buildings better. And it could be that we actually start realizing that some of the buildings shouldn't be offices. They should be residential apartments so that people are close to work. So there's going to be, I think, a rethink in the shape of cities and in the way we work. But we realize that the relationship between work and home shouldn't be too distinct. There has to be a closer relationship. So I think most of the buildings in the cities, I mean, are going to remain offices, but I think there's going to be a bigger drive for the cities to change and move away from the South African context of a city. That we all live 40 kilometers from the city and we drive to work every day. The cities are going to be more integrated, in my view. This is my prediction. And there's going to be a closer relationship between work and play and hope. And I think this is just a new society we're going to have to accept as being part of this new norm. The separation between work and home is going to be less and less. And this is how I see it.
Thank you for that. I'm going to hook that answer onto a question from Shasen Naidu, who asks, how important do you think it is for policies to be put in place to drive a meaningful, sustainable agenda, especially in the private sector? You talk about a rethinking of cities, integration of different things that we do, how we function. How do you think these policies should be put in place if we're going to drive this new sustainable agenda, particularly within the private sector?
It starts with how we shape urban planning away from this notion that there's a CBD and there is the kind of, spatial, the spatial definition that demarcates what is a CBD, where are the residential areas, where are the industrial areas. We've got to move away from that. We've got to start looking at a city as an integral kind of entity that has to accommodate all the various aspects. Obviously, there are some which are compatible, there are some which are not. And that reality, we also know how it works. So I think it for me starts with how do we really change the whole concept of the spatial development frameworks that we have in South Africa to be more inclusive, to be more integrated. I mean, I'm an architect who works on the urban scale as well. Do you know how difficult it is to motivate for social housing in a commercial development in the city of Cape Town? It's almost impossible. You're actually fighting against the city to create something which should be happening anyway, to have social housing as part of every development. But we have lost that space even to social movements like the Funa Ukwazi Social Justice Coalition. They have occupied that space because we are also not there, in fact, where we should be engaging with the officials and with the fathers and mothers of the city to say that we need to change the way cities function. So I'm of the view that, it has to be a recognition first and foremost that cities have to play a different role than they're playing now. And we cannot have a situation where the cities remain exclusive enclaves, which they are at the moment. The issue of affordable housing, South Africa is way behind the world insofar as providing affordable housing, and it is left to the individual to be able to choose where they can afford to live. In countries where I've lived and studied and have actually researched, it is the duty of the state to ensure that housing can be made affordable for everyone. It's not the individual who must decide this. So it starts at the level of, at policy making, how do we define the role of the state when it comes to the built environment? And at the moment, our country is providing great initiatives in terms of housing the poor, which is the poorest of the poor. But we all know that the medium income, middle income, young professionals, young families can't afford to live in the city. And this is left to the market to decide. It's not going to work. So I think we are in a situation where we have to rethink the policies that define urban life in South Africa. And we've got to change completely from where we are right now.
You do have someone in the chat who does agree with you. I'll read their comment. We have to incorporate more affordable housing into the work hubs and mix low and high income so people don't spend half their salary on transport. But it requires a shift of thinking in the country. I'm not sure if we are ready for that. As a brief response, as the president of SAIA, do you think as a country we're ready for that shift?
At a certain level of consciousness, we are. I mean, I really think that there are a lot of thinkers and people that could contribute a lot in this direction. The question is, where are they on the table? Are they on the table or outside of the table? At the moment, they're outside of the table. So in reality, the thinking, I'm confident, is there. I mean, we've got people who have lived, studied abroad, people who've traveled. I mean, our own experiences tell us that it's easier to be closer to work than to be far from work. It's just simple. It's not a difficult science, but our cities don't allow that. So the question is, how ready are we? I think at the moment we're still quite a way from being ready in terms of translating this into reality until the penny drops. And maybe COVID-19, the new norm, is that wake-up call that makes us all realize that the current dispensation has not been working and we have got to change it, and we've got to change it quickly. So the issue of affordable housing, I think, is going to dog South Africa for a very long time until we realize its centrality to the improvement of urban life. And I mean, the fact that we're still building in the periphery for people to travel into town, I mean, is ridiculous in my view. But at the moment, the cities do not allow for any of that to happen within themselves. So what do? You build 40 kilometers away and even further, in fact. So we are quite far from actually utilizing the energy that a city brings, because we are sprawling. We are sprawling more than ever before in all the cities, and there isn't that sense of densification. Our cities, in my opinion, are still very monocultural and monofunctional. And the city of the future is not going to be monofunctional. It's going to have to be more integrated and more interlinked. And then people are going to have to develop new lifestyles. I mean, yes, suburbs are going to remain there. People want to have gardens and all this, but you know, the young professional, the young parent who's entering the market, you know, can they actually afford that? Does the city allow them to be able to work closer to their environment, to live closer to their work environment? These are going to be the questions we have to ask. Why can't, in South Africa, the people that we regard as domestic workers and people who are doing the low-level work, why can't they live within the city? And we know when the trains are down, when my city is burning, when the taxis are at war, we're all stuck because the people who work in our houses and in our firms, in our offices, can't come to work. It's a zero-sum game. We can't solve it until we change the policies and ensure that our cities are structured in a very different way than they are. Unfortunately, we have inherited them as they are, but I believe in architecture, let us face it, we have not addressed how the African city of today has outlived the colonial structure. We have not even talked about that. I don't even think even universities talk about that. We're just happy to carry on. I'm talking to you. I don't even think you guys are dealing with those issues in your curricula. You're happy to teach kids to be good designers and everything. But what about the softer social issues that we should be actually inculcating at university level to sensitize students about the realities of urban conditions, especially in African cities? Because or not, South Africa is in Africa, and you can see the impact of foreign nationals, our brothers and sisters from the continent who come to live in South Africa, they won't go to the township. They live in the city because that's what they know. That's where they have actually, in my view, contributed in transforming the cities to be actually places of living and not just working. So, I mean, if you've traveled, I mean, I've been to Lagos recently and I've been to Mpahlwa. If you go to those cities, you'll realize that there are two cities happening parallel to each other within the city. There is the colonial city and there is the African city, and they are all living next to each other. It's not necessarily a healthy relationship because the colonial city actually cannot accommodate the African city and the African lifestyle. The services are not enough. The buildings are not adequate to accommodate that kind of lifestyle. What are we doing about it? We have to find solutions, in my view.
Thank you for that, and you did put me on the spot. So your question about architectural learning site ties into Kevin Bingham's questions around how do architectural learning sites actually address SDGs, which is the Sustainable Development Goals in their curricula. And you're specifically asking a question, do architectural learning sites, of which I am a part, do we actually look at the reality of the cities that we live in this country, on this continent, in the rest of the world, or let's say the global south specifically? The short answer is yes. The long answer is a little bit more complex, not complicated, but complex. And I think one of the things, and I'm going to put it back out to you because you're also part of these organizations, is in terms of getting validation and accreditations, there's certain things that you have to demonstrate as an architectural learning site. And I think what a lot of ALSs, which is architectural learning sites, struggle with is how to tick those boxes, but maintain curricula and maintain agendas that is tied into things such as social responsiveness, things such as sustainable development goals. So within, I think the struggle within these architectural learning sites is the very struggle that you talk about that happens when people go into practice. You're an architect, you're an engineer, you're within this specialization, but you're actually called upon to have a toolkit that can move beyond those things. So directly answering Kevin Bingham, I do think most architectural learning sites are pressed upon and are seriously engaging, at the very least, engaging with social development goals. And to speak back to Dr. Mpahlwa, are trying to address society. The question now is, and this is to you as a seasoned practitioner, as an architect, as an activist, as somebody who is in an organization that leads architecture in this country, it goes back to my previous question. I think at the learning site level, we need to have stronger conversations with people such as yourself. How do we bring that experience into the school so we can better address the concerns you raise, so we can better address sustainability? And I think that's a response from me, but I'm going to take a question from John. He says, could the creation of multi-CBDs perhaps solve the problems of excessive travel to work and play?
Okay, I'd like to reflect, just turn your speaker a bit, your mic. Yeah. I'm going to just respond to the issues you've raised about learning sites, and you know how concerned I am about our teaching of architecture. And I will start by saying that our universities, in my opinion, for quite a while, and in fact until now, are not really engaging with the issues that we're dealing with adequately. I feel that in South Africa in general, our education system at university level, especially in architecture, is quite divorced from the issues that we're dealing with. And this is something that we need to address quite seriously. I do not see that universities even have a say in the policies that are being made. And I don't know why that is the case, because in my understanding, a university should be contributing towards policy formulation. We shouldn't be, as architects and practitioners, be dealing with these issues of policy when we've got universities that are actually the sites where these policies should be germinating, and there should be an interaction between practitioners and universities to help inform those policies in a better way. So I think on that, personally, this is my personal opinion, I think we're failing. Secondly, you raise the issue of accreditations and the toolkits that you need to fill in those boxes. Who makes those boxes? Who says a university needs to do certain things in a particular way? Where has that been determined and derived? Who actually sits behind and sets those criteria without actually engaging with the people that are actually working and living in those environments? I have a question around that, personally. And I think we need to start questioning, what are we accrediting our universities to do? That should be the question. And I think we need to have quite a deep discussion around those issues, so that whatever toolkit is provided, it must also meet the needs of the countries. It must meet the needs of the continent. I mean, look, I went to, in my travels, I went to Mpahlwa, and I went to Makerere University. I won't say something bad, but I felt like crying when I was at the School of Architecture there, seeing the fact that the students there do not have any of the facilities your UCT or your WITS or your Nelson Mandela University have in terms of just the teaching environment. The students were, sitting around one laptop, so keen. It was a Saturday. They were keen to do the work, but the university is not offering them. There's not even a copy machine. There's no printer in the School of Architecture. They have to go and print in town in order to come back. Now, you know yourself as an architect how much printing you need in order to produce a full set of design drawings and all this, testing things and checking and everything. And I came back to South Africa and saying, what can I do? What can I do to help those students in Kampala, eager to learn architecture? Makerere is one of the historic universities of Africa, but it is in that state. Then I traveled to Nigeria, went to Osun State, and went to one of the architecture universities there, which is one of the best in Nigeria, and it claims to be one of the best in Africa, and had a crit session with the students there. It was so fulfilling on the one hand, but looking at the environment in which they were learning, I felt that I actually asked myself, what generation of architects are we going to produce if they have got to study in those conditions? So there's a big, big, big role we have to play in ensuring that our universities not only teach architecture, but we actually get the students to understand the environment in which they are working and empower universities to provide that education to them. They are all hungry for education and for architecture, but in my judgment, I actually felt that we're failing them because we are not giving them the tools that they require in order to play the role that they should be playing in society. So insofar as universities, I think also the relationship between practitioners and academics is very weak in South Africa, in my opinion. And we need to improve that as well. Multi-CBDs, I mean, there are multi-CBDs. Century City in Cape Town is a second CBD. I don't know if maybe I understand the question well. Sandton has emerged as a second CBD in Joburg. Mpahlwa, Durban North is another CBD emerging in Durban. I think PE has got a similar situation. Yes and no. But if the second CBD is at the expense of perhaps what would have been the historical city, because if you go to Europe or well, mostly Europe, where they have recognized the importance of the historic city and its flair, its character. Everybody wants to live in the old city because it's got that kind of urban energy and everything. If you go to Barcelona, you find that there's that, spirits of the old city. If you go to Rome, But our cities are very modern. They are all 20th century cities. They don't have that flair. But our CBDs are dead because commerce has moved away from the CBDs, and they've now just become big kind of dead environments. And there's a drive. I mean, Cape Town, I think, is the one CBD that really still has that semblance of being a working city. Some cities have had the commerce moving away and leaving the cities to actually deteriorate. And this is where I think we have to start looking at those empty buildings and actually reconfiguring them to provide social housing, affordable housing, and all these things. So multiple cities, CBDs, I mean, is a phenomenon that happens in most cities. But I think they should also not be, I mean, in my view, Sandton is quite a monofunctional commercial kind of CBD. Still with very little accommodation, and if it is there, it is very exclusive, it is very expensive, it is not affordable. So you still have a situation whereby the second CBD is replicating kind of the ideal commercial environment, which I mean is sanitized, which doesn't have that kind of urban quality that cities are known to have. So we have to then address, if we do multiple CBDs, what character should they have? That's my view.
Thank you very much. We're coming to the end of there's lots of questions coming to the end of the webinar. I think to end off, I want to say a big thank you to Dr. Mpahlwa for coming and sharing his thoughts with us around sustainability. But I think the important thing to get out of this webinar is that sustainability is not about a singular solution. It is economic, it is political, it is environmental, it is social. It's about a way of thinking and being, if I was to understand some of Dr. Mpahlwa's thoughts. And what these design awards try to do is actually highlight and acknowledge that there are various facets to sustainable living, or sustainability, as it were. And that's why it's called the Sustainable Design Award. What are the things that we do as practitioners, as creatives, as designers, that contribute to that better, integrated, multifaceted, I think Dr. Mpahlwa said, energetic urban environment that allows for us to live close to where we work, that allows for us to play close to where we work, that allows for us to engage, that allows for us to be able to afford a part of it. You don't have to have lots of money, it doesn't have to be inexpensive and exclusive. So I think as a take home, I think as a wrap up, that for me, I think is what is important about these awards is the fact that it is cross-cutting across several issues that are more complex, that are more, that are broader than just a singular thing. These awards are not just about architecture. As Dr. Mpahlwa said, it's about the societies we live in. He critiqued the way that we teach the students who are going to become practitioners in this. How do we relate to those cities and those places where there are less resources? It's quite broad and it's cross-cutting. So please do submit entries. And you can go to the website, which is www.sustainabledesign.co.za. As parting, Dr. Mpahlwa, 2 seconds. Any last thoughts, advice, insights?
Well, first, I have to be thankful for the opportunity. I see, however, that there are some people like Carolyn Tabana who's not been able to connect. We have to apologize to those that have been trying to follow the discussion and hope that we can improve on the platform that is being used for the webinar to make it more accessible. But I think that the other question I picked up is one that asked the question, you know, how do we educate the public? I think when I said we are not yet ready in South Africa, it's also because the public, you know, we don't engage in public enough on issues of architecture, urban planning. And as a result, you actually have to convince your client how important it is to take the right decisions, when in fact, to them, it's just about the money it takes to produce a sustainable or green building. So we need more public interaction, more public knowledge, more public education, so that the public realizes that they also have a stake in this. I happened to have designed a building in Berlin, which was our South African embassy. You have no idea the amount of public engagement that was required for us to put that building up. And in fact, when the embassy was being opened, I'm talking about 2003, all embassies in Germany are obliged to open their doors for people to see how these buildings that they've been commenting on, that they've been helping to shape, actually looks like. And I think that level of public involvement we don't have in South Africa, where we engage the public in the shaping of urban environment. The only thing we do is comment, I want to build a garage in front of my gates. Do you agree or not? And that's the level of public engagement. But it is not about education and informing about even the rights of the citizen when it comes to the city and all the policies. So we need to change from kind of public participation to actually active public participation, whereby there is interaction and a give and take process. So I hope that such discussions can help create that environment as well.
That brings us to the end of this webinar. If there's any last burning questions, I don't see any. I'm going to thank everybody for attending. We apologize for the technological glitches. We will get better, and please do look out for the next webinar in August. We promise that that is going to be a lot more seamless, and the platform is going to have to work for us a little bit better. Again, speaking to the times that we live in, for me, the great thing about times that we live in is that we've all had to learn different things, and we've all had to learn them really quickly, and we've all had to get good at them. And this is just one example of that. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your morning, and we will see you in August.
Yes, and thanks to you, Philippa. And I thank you also for the very big role today, head of school at UCT. And I think we should actually be opening up these discussions for everyone to have access to them. And I really believe that COVID-19 in reality is a wake-up call. I mean, I didn't even speak about the fact that it has enabled us to see the disparities in lifestyles, that people in the informal settlements where I work a lot actually can't even socially distance because the environment does not allow them. So I think it's a wake-up call for all of us, and we've got to really dirty our hands and make sure that we can contribute as we should in the shaping of our urban environment and our living conditions. So thanks everyone for listening and for the comments. We really appreciate it.
Everyone for being very patient with us. We will do better, and we will make this better. And I'm going to figure out how to find an easy way of turning my microphone on and off. Enjoy the rest of your morning. Have a good one. Goodbye.
Okay, thanks everybody.